Hello and welcome to another video. So prior to today's video, I've done two videos about my solar install that I did myself. One was about the costs of how much it cost to install, and the other one was about the break-even period, those costs minus how much I've been producing each year. I've had the system online for about 17 months now, and what I've been doing as well during that time frame is I've been checking the meter to see how much energy my home is consuming. So it's kind of a low-tech method, I know. I wish that I could have a system like, say, Tesla's, where they have an app that shows you how much you're consuming versus producing. But I don't have that, and this is my next best method because my utility, they only give me data once a month in my utility bill, and that's just not enough for me. And so what I do is I come out every day and I check the meter. And I'll show you what that looks like now. So on the meter, on the side of my home, there are two numbers that it reads back and forth between. The 24 is how much power I have pushed into the grid, and the 14 is how much power my home has consumed from the grid. And then the numbers to the right of those are the numbers of kilowatt hours, and those are cumulative. So it's the all time since the meter was installed in August of 2017. And so when I enter those two numbers into Google Sheets, I then go to the Solar Edge monitoring portal and I input how much electricity my solar produced in that day. And then with those three numbers, I'm then able to calculate a whole bunch of other numbers, and then I also created some charts and graphs related to those numbers. And so I wanted to go over those with you now and show you what's possible.
All right, here is my data set. You can see here that these first three grade columns, those are what I was just talking about, the from grid numbers, the to the grid numbers, and the production numbers in kilowatt hours. So then the rest of these columns are calculated columns. And I've created some charts to show these data. So I'm going to be going over briefly defining what these columns have in them, and then we'll get into the charts to show you what the end result looks like. So total produced is basically looking at the production numbers, the daily production numbers that I'm inputting, and it's just adding them up together. So it's looking at all of the previous rows before, and it's just adding them up. So if I click up here, you can see it's highlighting, it's taking the total produced plus the new day, and then it's adding it in there. And it just keeps repeating that all the way down. The total produced value is taking the total produced column and it's multiplying it by the average price per kilowatt hour in Utah. So 10.95 cents per kilowatt hour. And if you wonder where I'm getting the sources for that, just look in the description below in this video. Total net grid, that is just, I'm wondering, am I positive or negative in relation to the grid for all time? So since my solar went online, have I produced more than I've consumed or vice versa? And you can see, initially I went negative, and then I went positive, and then I went negative, and we'll look at that in the charts. Then daily net grid. So for any particular day, was it a negative or a positive day? And that of course depends on, like, was it cloudy or did I use a lot of electricity? I mean, there were some days I ran a deficit even though it was a perfectly sunny day. I just used a lot of power that particular day. Estimated RMP, that is Rocky Mountain Power. So that's my estimation of what my current balance is on my net metering policy with Rocky Mountain Power. And so you can see this column, I have sections that are white and some that are gray, and those are just showing the alternating months. So here for this balance, you can see I was estimating that I was negative 360 kilowatt hours in September, and sure enough, I was negative 352. And I read the meter around 8 p.m. every day, so that explains the slight discrepancy for every month. But I'm really pretty close. I mean, you can see down here 263 versus 260. So that RMP statement column, that's when I actually get my power bill every month. I input my balance that they have on record there, so I can see how close and accurate I am. Okay, used directly. So that is calculating how much energy I have actually used directly from the solar panels themselves. As the electricity was being produced, I consumed it immediately. And so if I'm consuming a lot of electricity while it's sunny, then this number will be high. But if it's not very sunny, then I'm potentially going to have very little directly consumed power. Now this column is a cumulative column. The next column over is the daily column. Um, so you'll see that there are certain days where it was very sunny and I used a lot of energy. Maybe it was air conditioning, maybe we did a load of laundry that day. Sometimes we did everything all in one day. Use the freeze dryer. We're canning on the stove, doing laundry, air conditioning, we had really high consumption days some days. In fact, down here you can see there's a 50, there's a 54. Um, oh, I haven't gotten to that column yet. So this next column is the daily used column. So this is calculating how much energy I actually used total that day for my whole home, whether it be from the grid or from solar. And you can see here there was a day that we hit 71. That's my second highest day. Um, and we'll get into the charts on that. So total used, now this is a cumulative number as well. So the red column is daily and this one is just total. And then total used value. So it's showing how much energy have I used and how much would that have cost me to purchase that from the grid exclusively. Daily used value is showing once again how much that particular day of electricity cost me. And then average daily used is just taking a tally of the average over time. So the first day is just itself, and then each of the following days build. And so they're always including that first day, and so the number gets more and more accurate over time. Then I have some notes over here. Basically, it's mostly just when I was using the freeze dryer because it consumes a lot of energy, about 16 kilowatt hours per 24 hours of operation versus my home's average for 2 years prior to getting the freeze dryer was 20 kilowatt hours a day. So a freeze dryer is about 3/4 of my whole household's consumption on average. And then these particular days we were canning on the stove boiling water for the majority of the day. So that's why I put that on there as well. And then lastly, guest. Sometimes I'm out of town or for whatever reason I'm not able to read the meter. And so I come back and read it when I can and then divide the difference between the days and put guests on them. And so if I jump down here all the way to the bottom of this data, you can see I've got it through January 8th of 2019, and you can see some of the cumulative figures down here. So far, for instance, my solar has produced 14,800 almost kilowatt hours of electricity since the system went online, and that equates to $1,600 worth of electricity in about 17 months. Um, my relationship with the grid is that I've consumed 575 kilowatt hours more from the grid than my solar has produced. And this number will probably get back to breaking even in the spring of 2019. But the takeaway from this is I got the freeze dryer right at the same time as the solar, and the freeze dryer is taking more than I had expected, even though I had oversized my solar array 30% based on historical averages. It's still consuming more than that. So I may end up adding some additional panels down the road. Some other cumulative numbers here. I have consumed directly nearly 6,000 kilowatt hours from the sun versus over here my total consumption is 15,000 kilowatt hours. And then my total consumption value is at almost $1,700, 1682. And then my total average for all time is hovering right around 30 kilowatt hours in the last 17 months of consumption. And remember, my average before going on solar, I had 2 years of data to go with, and it was right around 20. It was actually slightly less than 20. So my consumption has gone up significantly. All right, so let's jump over to the charts. Okay, so we've got the daily solar production. This is basically just graphing out every day and how much it produced. So you can see here in the beginning, we start out in August and we're producing pretty good, and the days vary a bit depending on cloudiness, etc. And then we start to get into the fall, and it starts to have shorter days and also cloudier weather. And we get into the winter. We get past the winter solstice, which is right around in here, December 21st, right there. So that's the shortest day of the year. And then it starts to go back up. And then we are really producing well when we get into the springtime in June. We just really performed really well, and the summer solstice is right here in June, and then the days start getting shorter again, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can see that cycle kind of swooping through this chart, but you can also see how much variability there is. Some days we're getting 45, 46. My highest I got was a little bit over 46 kilowatt hours in a day. 46.6, and then some days, well, I got zero, or 0.005. That day there was snow on the panels. So daily used. So starting out here, we're in the fall. Right here, the beginning is August, middle of August. It's still hot outside. These are like, typically 90, 95-degree days for highs. And then getting in here into the fall, we're starting to harvest a lot of fruit. And so we are canning that fruit and freeze drying it and that sort of thing. So that's why you can see we have this peak right here on that really hot day, and then we finished doing that, and so then we dropped down into a normal level of consumption over the winter. Um, and then you can see our consumption starts to raise again right around here. It's like if we look at this peak, that was June. So the weather's starting to get hot, so the AC is starting to kick on more and more often, and you can see that increasing up the consumption. And then we have another peak here the following year, 2018, which is slightly higher than in 2017 when we're once again canning. And actually, if you look here, daily used with notes, I've overlaid when we were using the freeze dryer and we had the canning going. The canning was really only on these two peaks, just for a few days each year. This year we did canning September 5th, and this year we did it on September 19th and 20th. Um, but you can see basically each day that is one of these spikes pretty much is the freeze dryer, with a few exceptions. And these other spikes are probably, frankly, the dryer, for clothing, drying clothing, because I found that it was consuming about 3 kilowatt hours per load of laundry. And some days you do several loads of laundry in a day, right? So that is easily causing each of these spikes. All right, so daily produced versus consumed. So this is consumption versus production overlaid on top of each other. It's pretty muddy looking, but it's still kind of interesting. You can see where there's big red areas above the production, and then there's these low areas where production is way higher than the consumption. And of course, the whole goal of solar is to be able to average out and break, maybe as close to breaking even as you can at the end of the year. Um, and in this case, the Rocky Mountain Power net metering policy resets in March, actually, not the end of the calendar year. So your March, whenever your bill comes in the month in March, which for me is usually around the 25th of the month, is when they reset your balance to zero. If you have some kilowatt hours credited to you, they just keep it. They don't pay you for it, but they reset your balance to zero every year. So part of the reason why I built this is so that I could keep tabs on where my balance was and see if maybe I had excess energy I needed to maybe do some more freeze drying or charging of my Nissan Leaf to not leave too much energy on the table and just have it taken away. Okay, so daily used directly with total consumed. So used directly, remember, is the amount of energy that I've consumed directly from the solar panels in the moment that it was produced from the sun. So that's this yellow. And so it just so happened that, well, you can see we had a sunny day while we were canning, and we were canning in the middle of the day. So we were able to consume pretty much all of the energy that the solar produced, plus we pulled from the grid, and that's what this huge spike is. And so you can see with each of these days, kind of what that looks like. You can see the general overall trend, though, is that yellow is higher in the summertime, and that makes sense from the air conditioning perspective. It's hot when it's sunny, right? So, and we produce more energy when it's sunny, and so it kind of naturally matches there to some degree. All right, so this is the monthly produced. versus consumed. So the black is what was produced that month, and the red is what was consumed. And so in September, we consumed more. In October, we produced more. And then November, December, January, February, and March, we were all consuming more than we were producing. But you can see the production was at least uh, raising in March to try to match it, but still not quite. But then it switched in April. And you can see that we were producing excessively more than we were consuming, and that was creating a nice healthy balance in our net metering account. And then we started just to break even in July. It's really hot, but it's also producing really well. And then August, we start to get a little bit behind. And then in September is when we started using the freeze dryer heavily. And obviously, it's still hot and just other lifestyle living. It's not like I'm really trying to control how much we're consuming. This is just life happening. But I would venture to say that most of this excess is the freeze dryer, frankly. And you can see we had 4 consecutive months of pretty heavy overconsumption based on our production. Before my solar, before I installed it, like I said, my average consumption per day was 20 kilowatt hours, and that translates to 584 kilowatt hours per month. And based on the Utah average, you can see that's 745. So we were actually fairly low. And then once we got solar, which incidentally coincides with getting the freeze dryer, so it's kind of muddied data, kind of, but you can see basically our consumption jumped dramatically. And I think some of that is because we're like, hey, energy is now relatively free unless we use up more than it's producing, but freeze dryer's taking a lot, and so that's just kind of where that goes. All right, just a couple more charts here. Daily used directly. So this is for each day how much we were using um, directly from the solar. Daily net grid. So for the each day, were we negative or positive in relation to the grid? So did we put more into the grid or less? So here, for instance, we put 27 kilowatt hours more into the grid than we consumed versus down here, we consumed 34 kilowatt hours more than we put into the grid. So you can see we were running a deficit and then went positive. And you can see there's some general trends here that keep being consistent across these charts. You can see the same going up and down at different seasons of the year. And then here, this is interesting, you can see the all-time net grid. This is not including me paying for any utility bills or anything. This is showing how my production versus my consumption is for all time. And so you can see that we went down into September, we were running a negative balance, and then we recouped some of that in October because it was a really sunny month, so it brought us back up to close to even. And then it kind of meandered around neutral and then started to run negative as we ran into February and March, and then March started to produce pretty well. So we were starting to run, positive days, which got us back to neutral. And then the springtime just really continued to take off, and we ramped up. And so in relation to the all-time grid, we got to a peak of about 813 kilowatt hours. Um, and then it started to decline from there, and we used a lot of energy this fall, and then we stopped using as much for a portion of October, and then we started using it again heavily, and it ran us way down into a deficit there. Um, Now this is similar to that previous graph, but what I've done is incorporated in every time I've had to pay for electricity. So we were running a deficit, and then I paid my bill, and it jumped us back up to neutral. And then we started to run a balance, and these red dots are each time I get a utility bill from Rocky Mountain Power. So you can see that was a statement there. That dot's a statement, that dot's a statement. So you can see my estimations are right on par within a few kilowatt hours. And you can also see how much additional data I'm getting, how much it swings between each month and getting the bill from them. Right here is where my balance was reset. So I left 105 kilowatt hours in my account, and it got reset, and I lost that, went down to zero. And then it continued to build from there into the spring, and we had an awesome balance. It got up to the point where we had on our Rocky Mountain Power balance about 1,031 kilowatt hours. Um, and then it started to decline from there, and we used it heavily and until it actually dropped off a lot faster than I expected because of how much we were consuming. And so then I ended up having to pay a bill right here, which was the first time I had had to pay the bill since way over here. So I went from September all the way to December of the following year, not having to pay any utility bills whatsoever. And then it looks like in January I'm trending to having to pay a little bit again, but um, such as the nature of solar, you don't always know how much you're going to get. This is the all-time accumulation versus production. So in the red is how much we were using, the yellow is how much we're producing from the sun. And so initially we used more than we were producing, and then they were really close to breaking even for a while, or really close to the same actually. And then our production really took off, and we started to be quite a bit more, and then our consumption increased and our production dropped off, and so they switched places again. And that's how that works. And then average daily consumed, finally. This is the last chart. And so you've got some pretty irregular, yeah, like it's jumping up and down, but it doesn't have a lot of data to go off of. So each day we were consuming a whole lot. It rose our average quite a bit. We got up to 42 as an average for just those few weeks, and then over the winter it started to level out and drop off, and we were down in the 26, 25 range. And then as the summertime of 2018 came on, it average was slowly rising, and now we're pretty much leveling off right at 30. And you can see for the last several weeks, starting in December, basically, it's been pretty much solidly right on 30, and I anticipate it sticking right around 30 into the future because we have a pretty good data set to represent. Well, I guess it's a little bit more than exactly 1 year, but it is still pretty close. So that's what our average is going to be.
And there you have it. That is my data. I'm curious what you think. Would you potentially go and read your meter every day just to be able to see what your production versus consumption looks like? Personally, I don't intend to do this daily going forward, but I did want to get a good solid data set so I have an idea of what's happening. Was this helpful for you to be able to see my data? Leave your comments and questions below, and I will get back with you. And with that, have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye.